Hi, everyone. Mike White here. Welcome to this week's vlog post. Well, here we are. We are on the eve of the biggest change in modern day real estate. Um, Starting Saturday, the NAR settlement is here. And based upon that settlement agreement, there are changes, very significant structural changes on how commissions are going to be dealt with, disclosed, advertised, marketed, however you want to put it. And so, we've talked about this here for months, that there's been very little as far as guidance goes, very little information coming from NAR or the real estate boards. In my own community, speaking to a number of realtors, many of whom still don't have any idea that the world changes for them on Saturday. So we've been talking about it and have tried to share with you information so that at least you understand um, where we fit as far as the mortgage industry goes. And I want to tell you, on one hand, the lack of structure and guidance by the National Association of Realtors, the lack of information coming from the local real estate boards is pretty disturbing. But the one thing that I can tell you is that I am very proud of the mortgage industry. I'm proud of the mortgage industry as a whole. I'm proud of all the agencies revolving around the mortgage industry regarding this, because to be honest with you, virtually everyone has chimed in from the mortgage side in the secondary markets, explaining how they're going to view this potential settlement and the impacts that it's going to have on the marketplace. And so, literally for months now, the mortgage industry has been prepared. The mortgage industry has understood the requirements. The mortgage industry is well aware of how certain things are going to fit into the puzzle of the transaction and what to be on the lookout for. And that's why this week, I tell you, you have to take extra care and caution on all the contracts that start rolling into you, starting on Saturday, because the verbiage in those contracts could make or break your deals. And, the specific language, the actual terms and words being used are going to matter. And so it is really important that we understand you can't just throw words around, because words have specific meanings, especially on whether or not your buyer is going to qualify for a loan or not, or a seller's contribution or concession of any kind, or what their contributions are toward the transaction. It's really important that you know this and that your referral partners know this, because after, again, speaking to a lot of different people, there's not a lot of clarity, and people just throw terms around, and it matters. So you have to be very clear. We've heard from Freddie, we've heard from Fannie, we've heard from HUD, we've heard from the VA, we've heard from all these entities, and they're perfectly comfortable with the seller paying the buyer's agent fee, their buyer's agent fee. They're comfortable with them doing that. It doesn't have to be calculated against a seller's concession, as long as it's stated that the seller agrees to pay X% or X dollar amount, X fee on behalf of the seller. It can be separate from what is already the standardized seller concession based upon the program that you're using. And you have to understand that. You have to be clear, because somebody who's preparing that offer, somebody who's preparing that contract, somebody who's involved in those negotiations, misrepresents or misuses a word or whatever in the deal, and you end up with a transaction that you can't structure the way that they had intended, because they said, oh, well, the seller's going to pay a 3% seller's concession, toward closing costs. And or they're going to pay a 6% seller's concession, toward closing costs, which includes no, there are two different things. A seller's concession is a seller's contribution as it retains to them paying fees for the buyer. It's different when it comes to the transaction than it is the representation. And you have to be aware of that. And if it's not spelled out differently, it could cause you issues. The other piece of this puzzle is if, in some regard, that buyer is not getting that agent's fees paid for, and they have to pay for it out of pocket. If that seller doesn't pay all or part or whatever of the fees, and that buyer is now responsible for those fees, my understanding, and based upon the language that I've read, it's very clear that that's not part of the buyer's contribution toward the transaction. So if they have a minimum contribution of whatever amount of money toward the transaction, and they have to pay those fees, then you have to be very careful, because that's not part of what's going to be acceptable when it comes to their contribution toward the transaction. So just keep that in mind. It's really important that you get clear that this is happening. And it's important that you talk to your buyers, and it's important you talk to your agents. And it's very important that you look at your contracts over the weekend, because it starts Saturday. So yeah, the contracts that go into place today and tomorrow are what they are. But starting Saturday, those contracts have to be worded to comply with the new rules and regulations. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of education out there on this. So you're going to have to stay on top of it. The other piece of this puzzle is the fact that, again, depending upon where you live, some states we have attorneys that are representing, or attorney states. And so it's very clear where the attorneys will go through the language and whatever. But in the negotiation itself, and in many states and in most states, it's the agents that are preparing the contract, the offers and the contract to sales, and the words are going to matter. And hopefully the local real estate local real estate boards do a great job in explaining this and changing their forms appropriately so that we don't end up into any issues. And again, remember, we may go through a big change again down the road, because the judge in this case isn't due to comment on the settlement agreement or any of the other things until November 26th. So here we are. We've got this going into the weekend, so pay attention to it. Last but not least, this week's CPI, PPI news, pretty much as expected. It was what people thought it was going to be. The market still continues to believe that rates will continue lower, and slowly, as do I. And today we're going to have initial claims and continuing claims for unemployment. Again, if things go according to expectations, it shouldn't move the needle a whole lot. But obviously, there's always the possibility of some sort of surprise when it comes to the weekly numbers. So just pay attention. I don't think there's anything earth-shattering, but mind you, this is a slow move, and we all know that the Fed is likely to cut rates in September. Short-term rate cuts don't necessarily apply to the mortgage industry. They don't necessarily, move equally. If the Fed cuts by 25 or 50 basis points in September, it doesn't mean the mortgage market is going to fall, and people are going to say 25 to 50 basis points. They're going to think in their head, okay, so rates move down 1/4 to 0.5% in the mortgage environment. That may be a result, but there's not a specific correlation between the two. And we all know through history, there have been times where a Fed cut has led to higher mortgage rates. There has been times where Fed's cutting have meant lower interest rates or no movement. So just keep that in mind as we are progressing. As always, you have questions or comments, it's Mike at imtcoaching.com. Take care. We'll talk to you again next week.